This series is called Words to Live By. Potent phrases from the Bible that we need to know, that we need to own, that we need to internalize. And last week, I taught about the fruit of the Spirit. And that message seems to resonate. It's gotten a lot of traction online this week. But one thing you might not know is that we did an entire series on the fruit of the Spirit a few years ago, one summer. And that whole series is available to you. So if you'd like to dig a little deeper into expressing your faith through love so that your life can be fruitful, you can find those messages on our homepage through the link that says Squeeze. That was the name of the series, and I just encourage you to check that out. Today's words to live by aren't about fruit. They are all about strength, but with a twist. Strength that is stronger than you can imagine, but strength that is different than we imagine. We're in awe of strength. We're mesmerized by grand displays of strength, whether it's the strength of nature's power or the strength of mankind's engineering or the strength of human creativity or the strength of great talent or the strength of a legendary driven leader or the strength of committed patriots. Constructive or destructive, we all stand with a certain level of respect for great displays of strength. Now, sure, we root for the underdog, but the whole reason we call them the underdog is because they're not likely to win. The top dog wins. Strength almost always wins. Now, strength comes in different packages in a variety of forms, right? I mean, more smarts is stronger. More force is stronger. More money is stronger. More troops is stronger. More experience is stronger. And we could keep going with the list, but the end result would be the same. Strong wins. And we love watching strength. Last month, Tom Stoltman finally won the title he'd been training for since the earliest days of his adulthood. At 27 years old, Stoltman was declared to be the world's strongest man. And while he can lift 700 pounds, his real specialty is in the Atlas stone competition. This is where contenders have to lift 5 massive stones up from the ground onto a platform. And each one of these stones weighs a different amount, starting at around 300 pounds, with the biggest one nearly 500 pounds. Stoltman broke a world record, finishing the placement of all 5 stones in 18 seconds. We champion strength. Why? Because we see personal strength as synonymous with personal ability. The stronger I am, the more I'm able to do. And so we kind of think of it like this. Nobody ever says it this way, but we think my strength equals my ability. It's all kind of about me. My strength equals my ability. Now keep this handy because it's going to be important in a few minutes. There was a guy in the Bible who really understood this concept, and his name was Paul, and we've actually been unpacking his teachings the last couple of weeks here at our church in this series. And at one point, Paul had real strength and real power. And he talks about this in one of his letters. He says, "You know my pedigree, a legitimate birth." So he's kind of giving us his resume, a legitimate birth, circumcised on the 8th day, an Israelite from the elite tribe of Benjamin, a strict and devout adherent to God's law, a fiery defender of the purity of my religion, even to the point of persecuting the church, a meticulous observer of everything set down in God's law book. So let me break down what he's saying here. Paul talks about his birth, and that means he was born a pure Jew, which really mattered in his day if you were Jewish. The circumcised on the 8th day confirms that his family was not just Jewish in name, but they were devout. His family was prestigious, and Paul himself grew up to be very strict about following all of the religious regulations. He was gifted in how he defended Judaism and flawless in his knowledge of the law. All of those things are unpacked right here. In other words, he's basically saying, hey, I was the best of the best. Seriously, born strong, lived strong, believe strong. In other words, what he's saying is, this is the motto that my life used to be built on, that many of our lives are built on. My strength equals my ability, and it's all about me. But Paul came to realize that there was a better way to live, that my ability might produce real strength, but there was a way to live that was even stronger than that. He found that regardless of his pedigree or his education or his credentials or his position or his wealth, he would never on his own be able to live to his highest potential. And he makes this clear in one half of one verse that you need to know now. Now, I'm going to give you the one verse in context. In a few minutes, I'll give it to you in its words to live by form, but I'm going to give it to you in context so you'll grasp what's happening with Paul right here. So here it is. He says, to keep me from being conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, now this is Paul talking, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Remember, our normal operating motto, whether we ever say it or not, the one that our culture is kind of built on is my strength equals my ability. But Paul highlights the strength of his pedigree and his zeal and his family lineage and his commitment to God. And then just before this text, he adds to his already impressive resume what he calls surpassingly great revelations from God. You see, Paul's a visionary, an exceptionally gifted visionary. And like any great leader, he's able to see a reality that does not yet exist and paint a picture so that everybody around him gets excited about it and wants to be a part of it. It's why Paul was so effective at planting churches. It's why he was so good at leading people towards Jesus. Now, I've got to tell you, for me personally, there are a few things that excite me as much as hearing a compelling vision. In fact, I would argue that a great vision is a strong vision. And a strong vision is one with the ability to become reality. It's not hard to put our equation back on that. My strength equals my ability. Vision really matters. It's motivating, it's inspiring, it's energizing, and Paul has that gift. In fact, he's so effective at painting a picture of what the future could be like that it made him incredibly strong as a leader. But that also meant he was very vulnerable to his ego, because even 2,000 years ago, we operated on my strength equals my ability. And that's the temptation. We lean on our ability, which results in a recognition of our strength, whatever our strength is, and then ego is always there nearby. The next step that we often naturally take is to think that we're better than we are. We discount our weaknesses and inflate our strengths, and that's especially true when we compare ourselves with other people. Psychologists call this illusory superiority. And there's been several studies on this. Researchers one time asked 1 million high school students how well they got along with their peers. And not one of them rated themselves below average. In fact, 60% of those students believed that they were in the top 10%. A quarter of them rated themselves in the top 1%. Now, here's another one. A group of college professors one time were asked about their own abilities, and only 2% of them rated themselves below average. 10% said they were average, but 63% said they were above average. And a quarter of them rated themselves as truly exceptional. Of course, that is statistically impossible. I mean, one researcher said it like this. He said, it's the great contradiction. The average person believes he is better than the average person. A Christian psychologist, Mark McMinn, wrote this one time. He said, one of the clearest conclusions of social science research is that we're proud. We think better of ourselves than we really are. He said, we see our faults in faint black and white rather than in vivid color, and we assume the worst in others while assuming the best in ourselves. Paul knew he was capable of this. Do you? I mean, do you have some strengths? Of course you do. God gave you the strengths that you have. But we've got to remember our normal operating paradigm, which says my strength equals my ability. It's all about me. So here in 2 Corinthians 12, Paul does something rare. He turns and he starts to talk about his weakness. In fact, his great weakness he calls a thorn in my flesh. And the Greek word for thorn is skolops, and it can be translated thorn, like the thorn on a rose bush, but it can also mean stake. And I imagine that Paul is describing a stake that's being jammed into his side and then being turned inside of him, which is why he would talk about torment that he was feeling. Now, we don't know what this affliction was. There's a lot of speculation. Some people think he was losing his eyesight, he was going blind. Some people think he was getting migraines. Others make the case that he suffered from a recurring attack of malarial fever. All of that is just kind of a guess. We don't know. What it was is far less important than knowing that it was bad. I mean, in his own words, Paul said it tormented him. This is not trivial. It's serious, whatever it is. Now, if you're like most people, when you have a weakness that is glaring, or worse, when you have one that is painful, either physically or emotionally, you pray that God would remove it, right? I mean, that's what Paul did. He prayed that God would take this painful affliction away from him. I've certainly done that. Paul's affliction, whatever it is not a laughing matter. It's serious. He prays with all his heart that God would remove it, and God doesn't. But we read this text, when you and I read this part of the Bible, we don't have an emotional attachment to it. Paul might be familiar to us, but he's not family to us. So we acknowledge his pain, but we don't feel it. We believe that he's hurting, but we don't internalize it. But we should. In fact, we must. Because Paul's circumstance is not an isolated case, or it's not simply a story from the Bible. It is actually our reality too. It's a truth that we have to confront with a clear understanding about what God will do and what God might do, what God guarantees and what he does not. It's one of the most challenging realities of following Jesus, because there are voices out there, leaders and teachers in the larger church, that would tell us that life with Jesus is access to power. And the implication of what they're teaching is that that power is a button we push in our moment of dire need, and that he will respond in the way that we ask. In other words, God will grant the request of the faithful. He guarantees it. He promises it. Except it's not true. God never promised to always intervene. God never guaranteed that your faithfulness would result in a life of ease and smooth sailing and no trouble. In fact, he promised the opposite of that followers of Jesus would still experience trouble in the world. And the moment of truth about this for most people of faith comes not at their conversion, but in their affliction. Everybody here has prayed for something that didn't happen, begged God for something they didn't get. And I'm not talking about trivial things like your prayer for winning the lottery or that your team would win the championship. I mean those life-altering moments when a person begs God for something that everyone would agree that God ought to do. And when he doesn't, what will be our response? How does a person cling to faith even when God does not intervene and life is never the same again, when the loss is real and heavy. When Paul begs God to intervene, God's response is this, and these are our words to live by today. Here's what God says to Paul. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. My grace is sufficient. That means enough. My grace is sufficient for you. It's enough for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. See, God doesn't really agree with our operating motto of my strength equals my ability. It almost sounds like God champions weakness. Like in some strange way, it might actually be a good thing that your weakness might be used for a good thing. Note what God does not say. I mean, Jesus doesn't tell Paul to ignore his weakness or pretend it doesn't exist. He doesn't say that Paul ought to work on his weakness. He doesn't instruct Paul to explain away his weakness. He doesn't even suggest that Paul can overcome his weakness. Jesus injects something else, something new, something transformational into the formula. Now we have the strength of God working through my weakness. And this will change the formula. Remember, the old formula was my strength equals my ability. We're going to scratch that out now. That's not true. Now we have a new formula. My weakness equals God's ability. My weakness equals God's ability. It activates God's ability because here's the truth. We don't always get what we ask for from God. And sometimes what we're asking, what we're begging God to do is going to be life-altering in a painful way if God does not do it, when God does not do it. Now, Paul doesn't tell us what his process is in his thinking, how he gets to this great place, even though God doesn't answer his prayer the way he wants him to. All we see are the words on the page. He prays, he begs God to take the pain away. God says, no, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And it looks like Paul says immediately, oh, okay, no problem. In fact, he actually goes further than that. He says, well, I delight in weaknesses, in insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. How nice. He makes it look easy. But it's not. And I am convinced that it was not for Paul either. I mean, this is a letter. And left out of the letter is the process. And I'm convinced there's a gap, there's a space, there's a season of time between the moment when Paul realizes that God is not going to give him what he asked for. He's not going to remove the pain. Between that time when Paul realizes that and his I delight in my weaknesses, hardships, and difficulties statement, we don't get to see that in the letter, but I'm convinced that it's there. And so it's okay if that's a process for us. Can we get there too? Absolutely. But first, we have to wrestle with this truth, the truth that God does not always give us what we want. It was true for Paul, and it's true for you and me. The real test of faith is what we do with our faith when life goes sideways and God does not intervene. I asked a few people that I knew who had been there, people who prayed their hearts out on their knees through countless tears, and God did not give them what they asked for, and their lives were never the same. I wanted all of us to know how they could cling to their faith even in their loss. So let me show you some excerpts from that conversation. You'll see Bill and Christy Donati, who lost their infant son, Noah. You'll see John and Tricia Tiller, whose son Eli suffered a traumatic brain injury, and while he did survive, he has some severe limitations and some ongoing care needs because of it. And you'll see Steve Bickford, who lost the love of his life, his wife, for more than half a century to cancer last year. My purpose here was to know from them, to hear from them about how they could cling to faith even though God didn't give them what they asked for. Take a look.
John,
How did that work for you? How did you actually cling to faith when the prayer didn't get answered the way you wanted it to?
I think for us, we had been through suffering time and time again. Not the same level of suffering, but different things that we struggled with. And I think the first time that we struggled the most was with infertility before Eli was born. And it was a long stretch, years, that we had lost a baby and we wanted another one. That was the time where we kind of decided on what our faith was going to look like. And we did that together. I used the plural because that was a thing that we went through together. When Eli had his accident and we didn't know if he was going to live, God's the only one who could restore his health. That was just part of the process, right? Like, you go through this bad thing and you pray for his life, and we have his life, and we're so grateful for that. And you know it doesn't stop there.
We thought because he had saved him that he was going to live. We thought that meant, well, he's going to heal him too. He's going to be 100% better, because that's how God will prove that he is worthy and mighty, and that it's not always the case. He is still good. He uses our situations for his glory, but it often doesn't play out the way we think that it should, or the way we want it to.
Steve, many people in our church got to see Peggy as she struggled through and fought, her cancer, and she was one of our just ones, and was so inspiring to so many people. And because of that, so many people prayed. We prayed that she would get well, and she didn't.
I prayed also. I know God heard me, and I know I had certain wants. Well, after I got the diagnosis, came out from the surgeon, and he told me what the diagnosis was: glioblastoma stage 4, the very worst possible. I got angry. I got feeling why. And I took a little walk, and then I came back to myself and said, "You got to fight this. You got to be there for Peggy." That was my focus, and stay strong in my faith, and know you're surrounded by those people that love you and care for you, and to be all I could for her. And I do know that when you pray, God hears your prayer. I know he knows your wants, but his plan is that he's going to meet your needs.
Christy, it's interesting when Steve talks about had to be strong for her. He had to be strong for her. And that's how we often feel when we're fighting for somebody we love. How did you convert that after he was gone? What was the faith journey like for you?
I was angry for quite some time. It wasn't fair.
It isn't fair.
I've yelled, I've screamed. We went through 6 years of infertility. Went through 6 years of just coming to a conclusion that it was just gonna be me and him. That was hard.
That was your resolve. You just resolved.
That was it. Bill actually had to be the strong one for me a lot of the time through everything with Noah, because I just didn't think I could do it. But I prayed and prayed, and I guess we were convinced with every ultrasound of seeing him that it was just going to get better. And it never did.
When you lost him, how do you reconcile that with some statement that God is good? How can that be true?
I believe that we were given a dream to have a family. And if God gave us that dream, then God also gave us the corresponding abilities to make it through that journey. We believed that there was going to be victory for us. And we understood that came with a battle. And that battle was for our mind. It was an emotional battle. It was a spiritual battle. It was a battle over our words and our attitudes. But that was the valley. That was where the battle was, and we understood that. And we knew that we had to get through that valley to get to victory. And that was our journey.
So what would you say to someone who was in a real struggle today with something they've been praying for, that it appears God is not going to answer the prayer the way that they want it to, and they may face some kind of real tragedy? What would you say to that person today? Because they're here today in church, and they're trying to figure out what faith is going to look like for them if they don't get what they're asking for. What would you say to that person?
Don't give up. Continue to ask. But if it doesn't happen, keep going. Like, don't stop. God is still gonna do something good. It will be hard. It will not be fair. It will require strength that you don't have. You will see where God's strength comes in your life. You will be able to, you will get closer to God as you allow Him to work through the situation with you.
Taking it day by day is really the only way to even get through it. I mean, you can't look at the whole picture and think, all right, well, here's how everything's going to end. You know, I got to get through this. It's never going to work. But constantly just feeling blessed and thanking God for everything that He has given you, no matter how you feel that the outcome should be and how it actually happens.
There's undoubtedly, God provides His grace sometimes directly to us, many times through our relationships, and especially our closest relationship. Like Bill and Christy said, and Steve, the church, the people that came around us. I mean, it's just incredible.
What's the fuel that keeps me going forward in life is my faith, my family, my friends, and Peggy's final words. My work is done, but there's more to do, and y'all need to do it. And that is a directive she gave me 3 or 4 days before she passed. And I see Peggy's picture every morning. She has her smile and a thumbs up. And I go up and say, how's the day going to be? And I sometimes say it's okay to ask why. It's okay to cry, but I'll never say goodbye.
Trusting Him is ultimately what it boils down to, because if you don't trust Him, then you're going to look for something else.
Trust Him to what end? Trust Him for what?
Trust Him to carry you through whatever happens. It's not always going to be good, but He is the only one who can sustain you through something like that.
This is the hardest reality for many people in my experience, because while we don't always get what we ask for, we do always have access to God's strength to persevere, to see His strength working through my weakness. And once we settle that God's grace really is sufficient for me, no matter what, well, then we're able to face any trial. My weakness, it turns out, is not a limiting factor for me. It's more like a divinely sized opportunity to show the world just how big God really is, how strong He is. And that's why Paul would say, look, I'm not really going to boast about my own strength, because that points to my ability. I'm going to boast about my weakness, which will point to God's ability. In fact, he says, I delight in my weaknesses. For when I am weak, then I'm strong. Maybe you need this right now. I mean, I don't know where you are, and whatever you're struggling with, I mean, certainly keep praying, keep asking God to do something extraordinary or even miraculous, because He might. But we can also resolve that no matter what, in our weakness, He is strong, and His grace is sufficient for me, regardless of what happens. To help you, we're going to teach you the chorus of an old song. It's super simple, but that's the idea. It'll be memorable. So, Paul, teach it to us.
Your grace is sufficient for me. Your strength is made perfect when I am weak. And all that I cling to, I lay at your feet. Your grace is sufficient for me. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Your power, it rests upon me. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Your grace is sufficient for me.
So whatever else you're doing right now, I'm going to ask you to stop for just a minute. And really, pull the car over, stop power walking, stop washing the dishes. Even if you don't normally sing with us, make an exception right now and sing this simple chorus straight from our words to live by today. It'll matter to us as we move through this week. Sing with us. Here it is.
Your grace is sufficient for me. Your strength is made perfect when I am weak. And all that I cling to, I lay at your feet. Your grace is sufficient for me. Your grace is sufficient for me. Your strength is made perfect when I am weak. And all that I cling to, I lay at your feet. Your grace is sufficient for me. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Your power, it rests upon me. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Your grace is sufficient for me. Grace is sufficient for me. Your strength is made perfect when I am weak. And all that I cling to, I lay at your feet. Your grace is sufficient for me. Power, it rests upon me. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Your grace is sufficient for me. Your grace is sufficient for me. Strength is made perfect when I am weak. And all that I cling to, I lay at your feet. Your grace is sufficient for me. And all that I cling to, I lay at your feet. Your grace is sufficient for me.
I'm so glad that you decided to be with us today, and I hope that you found this entire experience to be a worthwhile investment of your time. We heard some hard stories today, and if those resonated with you, maybe if you have a story of your own, we want you to know that we're here for you. We also posted a longer version of that conversation, which we gave you excerpts of today. If you wanted to check that out, you can watch that online. If you want to talk or you need somebody to listen or you need somebody to pray with you, our pastors are available to you, and you can reach out to us through our online prayer form that's right there on the website. Or you can talk to a pastor privately right now if you're logged into the chat. We've got articles on our website. We've done a longer conversation where we went deeper into the topic I talked about today that'll give you all kinds of insights and next steps in your process. And in just a few weeks, we have a grief share group that will begin meeting along with other small groups in our church. So you can find out more about connecting with a group at pccwired.net, or you can just reach out to us. We'd be glad to help. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that we'll see you again next week, and we hope that this week is defined by God's grace being sufficient for you.